Okay, gang, so I am just making this video sort of on the fly for kids who struggle with the reading. So please promise that you will not judge pronunciations, okay? Because I did not take the time to refine all of that before I started to record. This is on the fly. I snuck out of study hall and had Mr. Brown cover so that I could come to the conference room and do this. That being said, you might hear some interruptions, people coming and going. Okay, again, it won't be perfect, but if it'll help, then it's worth it. So we're starting on section 13, which is PDF page 33. Now, this file is the one called the Olympian Family, a New Religion. And you all have this already. So 13, Demeter and Persephone. Here's the introduction. It says, originally, Demeter was a local mother goddess like Rhea and Athena. She may have originated in Crete, but she was worshipped in Greece before the Greek-speaking tribes from the north brought Zeus into the area of Eleusis, near Thebes. Demeter taught mortal men how to sow and cultivate corn, which became a major source of food. Given the importance of grain and fertility to these agrarian people, that means they were farmers. Agrarian people are farmers. The worship of Demeter was a solemn procedure which gave rise to famous religious rites. The farming peoples needed assurance that they would survive. Their physical well-being was so dependent on their grain crops that the great goddess who watched over their wheat, barley, and corn was particularly dear to their hearts. They needed divine help in order to save enough rain for their semi-arid soil throughout the spring and summer, and yet not too much rain as it would mold the seeds before they sprouted or wreck the crops before they were harvested. Given their dependence upon their grain crops, the question of whether the seeds they had sown would sprout was literally a matter of life or death. The long, unproductive winter gave the agrarian people months to worry about their next year's crop. Without a good crop, food would be very scarce during the following winter, and a poor harvest meant starvation and death. Some farmers buried a female corn doll through the winter and dug it up in the spring to see whether it had begun to sprout. A sprouting corn doll was a miracle of nature, the portent or the prediction of a productive spring. The earth had lived and had died, but now it had returned to life. The myth of Demeter, Persephone, and Hades confirmed the idea of life, death, and rebirth. It symbolized or represented the cycles of the farming peoples, the cycles the agrarian peoples witnessed in nature each year. As long as the cycle continued unbroken, they could hope to survive. They developed an agricultural and religious ritual that became famous throughout the ancient world, called the Eleusinian Mysteries. It was based upon the myth of Demeter and Persephone. Demeter was called the mother of wealth, and another name for Hades was Pluto or Pluton. The Greek word for Plutos means wealth. Both immortals were necessary for a wealth of crops to emerge from the barren earth and mature to harvest. Persephone became the vital link between the two life-giving forces, Demeter and Hades, for she would alternate between the land of life and the land of death and rebirth, personally supervising the continuous operation of the life-supporting cycle of fertility. The idea that it was possible to produce a particular result by dramatizing it founded the Eleusinian ritual. Thus, in order to assure the fertility of the grain crops, each year in Eleusis and in other locations sacred to Demeter, specially chosen people would be permitted to take the parts of Persephone, Hades, Demeter, and several minor characters to perform the myth as a sacred play. To act in the ritual was, of course, a great honor, For the person who played the part of an immortal became that powerful being for the duration of the performance. The myth of Demeter also emphasized the concept of hospitality. The agrarian people, or the farming people, were a generally peaceful and non-aggressive society, treating others with humanity and generosity. The religion of Olympian Zeus continued to stress these principles even when the Mycenaean palaces had become defensive fortresses with outer walls 20 to 30 feet thick. Given the propensity or inclination of the immortals to arrive upon some mortal's doorstep disguised as a weary stranger, the host took his obligations to guests seriously. His behavior could determine his fate. Now we skip those anticipations. Now here comes the myth itself. After each volcanic eruption on the island of Sicily, grim Hades, who ruled the dead, would leave his dark land beneath the earth in order to inspect the damage. He feared that cracks in the earth would permit daylight to penetrate his kingdom. That would terrify his subjects, who had become accustomed to the unending or perpetual darkness. The Lord of the Dead was driving his golden coach on one of these occasions when gold-wreathed Aphrodite saw him as she was resting on her flower-strewn hill. There were flowers thrown all across the hill. Growing, I'm sure, but scattered all over the hill. She hugged her son Eros, who was beside her, and said, "Take your powerful weapons and shoot one of your winged arrows into the Dark Lord's heart now, while he is away from his misty land. Shall grim Hades remain free of our power when we have persuaded the Lord of Olympus, who is Zeus, and the Earth Shaker to our cause? Also, it will increase our power to make fair-haired Demeter's daughter Persephone our subject. She, like her childhood companions, gray-eyed Athena and Artemis of the golden arrows, openly scoffs at the idea of love." Love-inspiring Eros obediently chose the sharpest arrow in his quiver, bent his bow, and directed his arrow swiftly and accurately into the Dark Lord's heart, where it lodged. Hades has been struck. Immediately, the Lord of the underworld, which would refer to Hades, noticed fair or beautiful Persephone, who was radiant with joy as she played among the flowers of Sicily. His heart warmed with love for the beautiful goddess. He realized how much he and his gloomy kingdom needed her gaiety or happiness and her love. Therefore, he drove his golden chariot up to the summit of Mount Olympus, where he asked loud thundering Zeus, his brother, and Persephone's father, for her hand in marriage. The Lord Olympus replied, "Our sister, fair-wreathed Demeter, will never agree to this marriage. The mother of wealth and her daughter are devoted to the radiant beauty of the earth. Neither will agree to exchange the beauty of sunlight sparkling upon leaves and flowers for the cold, damp mists which cover or shroud the shades of the dead. Therefore, if you want the fair Persephone, you will have to abduct or kidnap her. You can always find her gathering the flowers she loves in the fragrant meadows near Mount Etna in Sicily." The Lord of the underworld, Hades, accepted his brother's advice as permission for the kidnapping or abduction. Then he returned to his dark land to make the necessary preparations for the arrival of his bride. Shortly thereafter, the maiden goddess was gathering her favorite flowers, lilies, violets, hyacinths, irises, and roses, into her lap when she noticed a beautiful flower that she had never seen before. She left gray-eyed Athena and Artemis of the golden arrows behind with the many daughters of Oceanus in order to take a closer look. It never occurred to her that her father, Zeus of the wise counsels, had persuaded Gaia to create a profusion of these delightful, fragrant blossoms in order to assist her grim Uncle Hades with his plan to kidnap her, and that the flowers were a trap. The beautiful or fair Persephone had just reached out with both hands to gather the lovely flowers when the earth in front of her suddenly collapsed. Before the young goddess could react, the golden chariot, drawn by 4 deathless horses, emerged from the chasm, or the big hole. The driver, a tall, dark, handsome god, gathered her up and dashed off with her as she struggled beneath the grip of his strong arm. Fair Persephone tried to free herself from grim Hades' grip, but her strength was no match for his. Terrified and weeping, she cried out for help, but there was no response. Frantically, the lovely young goddess searched the fertile earth, the dark sea, and the starry heavens, hoping to see her powerful father or her loving mother hurrying to her aid. But all was still. It was as if all life had frozen, and only she and the golden chariot were moving. The dark Lord Hades transported his captive over mountains and through valleys as he sped toward his underworld palace. The immortal horses, responding to their master's excitement and sense of urgency, sped relentlessly onward. They were driving through a lake when a water nymph who recognized fair-haired Demeter's daughter cried out to Hades, "Go no further, Dark Lord. Fair-wreathed Demeter will never permit this. The fair Persephone does not deserve such inconsiderate or unkind treatment. What you are accomplishing by force, you should win by gentle persuasion." With outstretched arms, the nymph desperately tried to stop the chariot, but Hades, impatient with her unsolicited or unasked for advice, restrained his wrath no longer. Giving his terrible horses the rein, he took his iron scepter and plunged it into the bottom of the lake. Upon contact, it created an unobstructive passage down into the depths of the earth. Into this dark chasm, or hole, or gap, the chariot descended, its rich golden glow now extinguished by the blackness of eternal night. Meanwhile, the lovely-haired Demeter suddenly heard the Sicilian mountain peaks echoing with her daughter's cries. A dreadful pain constricted her heart as she felt the terror in her child's voice. Frantically, the fair-wreathed goddess rushed to the slopes of Mount Etna, but all that remained to show that Persephone had been there was a pile of wilting flowers. Lovely-haired Demeter searched the entire earth for her beloved daughter. To light her way, the distraught mother ignited 2 pitch-filled pine trees in the volcanic fires of Mount Etna. She carried these bright torches day and night, and neither rosy-fingered dawn nor gray dusk ever found her asleep. Neither the blazing sun nor icy snows nor freezing winds distracted her from her relentless pursuit. She would not stop. Ceaselessly, or without stopping, she wandered over the surface of the earth through meadows, woods, and streams, through cities and towns, across deserts and seas. However, no matter where the frantic goddess searched, no one had seen her lovely daughter. The archer goddess, who would be Artemis, carrying her golden bow and arrows, helped in the hunt. And golden-helmeted Athena also searched, her gray eyes now grim, spear in hand, as she prepared to fight for her friend. However, their efforts were in vain. One day, thirsty and exhausted from her journey, great Demeter came on a straw-thatched cottage. The roof would be straw, kind of like the 3 little pigs. And at that cottage, she decided to beg for a drink of water from whomever lived there. An old housewife responded to her knock upon the door. She gave Demeter sweet barley water to drink, even though the goddess appeared to be a common beggar, with her long, tangled hair and her muddy, torn clothing. While the disheveled or messy guest leaned against the doorway, quenching her thirst, a boy named Abbas approached her and examined her closely with belligerent eyes. He had overheard her humble request and was anxious to learn who was accepting his family's hospitality. Now that he had investigated the stranger, he was definitely unimpressed. A scornful grin lighted his face as he watched the beggar woman drink from the cup. "You aren't thirsty, you filthy creature. You are greedy," he announced. Now think back to how important hospitality was, keeping in mind that sometimes gods and goddesses would disguise themselves as beggars to test mortals' dedication to hospitality. So Demeter burned with rage at his insolence or his rude behavior. She lowered the cup from her lips and stared down at him. Now that Abbas noticed her eyes, he was impressed with their brightness. In fact, as her anger brought color to her haggard face, he could see that once she might have been a handsome woman. Now, however, she was simply a dirty beggar. He made no effort to conceal or hide the sneer that his examination had produced. Finding it easy to read his thoughts and having had her fill of his arrogance, Demeter flung the remainder of her drink in Abbas's face. To his amazement, the liquid burned wherever the drops splashed. As he stared in surprise at the strange guest, he noticed that she was much taller than she had first appeared. Then he began to feel so strange, he thought only about himself. His back hurt too much to stand upright. Now he was comfortable only when he was lying down. He was shocked to realize that his arms had become much shorter and were functioning as legs. Try as he might, he could no longer stand. He could only move with a scampering motion, and then he seemed to be dragging something behind him. By this time, the beggar woman had become a terrifying giant. Fearing that she would step on him, Abbas scuttled off to the closest hiding place he could find, a crevice between two rocks in the garden. When the old housewife returned to her guest, she looked for her grandson, whom she thought she had heard talking to the visitor, but he was nowhere to be seen. As she watched, a tiny lizard scampered off into the garden as if it were being chased by a predator. Something about its frightened movement recalled her grandson's insolent or rude voice. Who do you suppose the lizard is? Questioningly, the old woman glanced at her guest. The brilliant glow in the visitor's eyes confirmed the old housewife's fears. She wept for the youth who could not sense divinity or a god or goddess in disguise. The goddess continued her search. People in every land and upon every sea noticed a tall, haggard woman with a torch burning in each hand, frantically seeking something she could not find. Finally, fair-wreathed Demeter returned to Persephone's favorite land, Sicily. When the flowered fields still withheld the secret of her daughter's whereabouts, the great goddess went up to Mount Olympus and questioned shining Helios, lord of the sun, as he stood near his chariot. "Helios, you who observe gods and mortals," the bereft mother began, "I heard my daughter's cries, as if she were being forced away against her will, but I could not see what was happening to her. Since you keep watch over the earth and sea, can you tell me which deathless god or mortal man carried her off?" To this plea, the shining son of Hyperion who would be Helios, replied, "Great Demeter, the lovely daughter of Rhea, I will tell you the truth, for I pity your grief over the loss of your lovely child. Your great brother Zeus, the cloud gatherer, is the only one to blame for your sorrow, for he gave lovely Persephone to your dark brother Hades to be his wife. So with her father's approval, Persephone was seized by her grim uncle, who transported her down to his dismal kingdom. However, this should not cause you such grief. After all, the ruler of the dead is a mighty lord and one who is honored by gods and men." Having given this information and advice, shining Helios climbed into his chariot and drove off with the morning sun into the heavens above. Fair-haired Demeter now seethed with savage rage against her great brother Zeus, lord of the black clouds. So Demeter is absolutely filled with anger. She renounced the companionship of the deathless gods on Mount Olympus, resolving to dwell in the land of mortals. She transformed herself into an older woman so that no one who looked upon her could recognize her. And in this disguise, she wandered through many fields and towns. Upon reaching the city of Eleusis, northwest of Athens, she sat down at the side of the road near a shaded well. Here she would be able to quench her thirst and rest a while, somewhat sheltered from the heat of the midday sun. When the daughters of the lords of Eleusis came to the well to fill their bronze pitchers, they saw Demeter sitting nearby and spoke to her. "Old mother," they asked, "who are you and where are you from? If you need employment, many women in our town would hire you as a nurse or as a housekeeper and would treat you well." To this, the mighty goddess replied, "Dear children, whoever you are, I shall answer your questions truthfully. I was living on the island of Crete when some pirates seized me and carried me off with them. They hoped to collect gold by selling me as their slave, but I escaped from them while their thoughts were on the evening meal. I have no idea where I am or who lives here. So if you could advise me where to seek employment as a nurse or a housekeeper, I would be grateful to you." The most beautiful daughter then responded, "Good woman, we mortals must accept whatever the gods give us, since they are more powerful than we are. Many honorable people of noble rank welcome you, for you also appear to be of noble birth and have the stature and bearing of an immortal. However, if you agree, wait here till we return home and see whether our own mother will employ you, for we have a young brother who needs a nurse." The goddess agreed to wait by the well while the maidens carried their water pitchers home and discussed the matter. Their mother, Metaneira, was delighted with the news. Consequently, they returned to the well and brought the stranger back to their father's palace. "Welcome, lady," Metaneira greeted the strange woman. "For your dignified bearing indicates one of noble birth. Yet we mortals must patiently accept whatever the gods give us. However, now that you are with us, I will share whatever I have with you. If you will agree to nurse my young son and rear him until he reaches manhood, other women will envy the rewards I shall give you." Hoping that Metaneira's son would help ease the painful loss of her own daughter, the fair-haired goddess accepted this employment and proceeded to rear the young child as if he were truly her own son. She gave him neither food nor milk. Instead, she covered his entire body with ambrosia, and each night she placed him in the blazing fire as if he were one of the flaming logs. Being completely unaware of their employees' child-rearing techniques, Metronaria and her husband were delighted to see how quickly their son was growing and how much he was beginning to look like a young god. Sorry, that's an alarm to excuse a student. And I lost my place. In fact, the great goddess would have made the child immortal and ageless if the mother had not spied upon her one night. As Metronaria quietly opened the door to the nursery, she saw the strange woman she had hired singing to the flames in the hearth. When she discovered that her young son lay buried among the blazing logs, she shrieked with terror. At this interruption, fair Wreath Demeter burned with rage. She removed the child from the flames and placed him on the floor by the hearth. Then she glared at his distraught mother and declared, "You mortals are too foolish to know what good and evil the future will bring you. I swear upon the eternal waters of the river Styx that I would have made your beloved son eternally young and alive, and I would have granted him enduring honor. Now, however, he can no longer escape that death which is every mortal's fate. However, because I nursed him and cared for him, I will still grant him enduring honor. Furthermore, I will give your oldest son a chariot which is drawn by winged dragons. Let him ride this chariot through the heavens and throw down upon the earth the grains of wheat I will give him, so that mortals will have more food to eat. For I am the honored goddess Demeter, who brings aid and joy to immortals and mortals. As for you, I want you to tell the people to build me a temple and an altar, and I shall instruct you in my sacred rites so that you may please me." With these final words, Demeter assumed her divine form. She became younger, taller, and infinitely more beautiful. Her beauty had no end, filling the palace with her brilliant light. Then she left. All night long, the fearful family prayed to Demeter, hoping that she would forgive their distrust. The people hastened or hurried to build the temple with its altar, and fair Wreath Demeter was appeased. That means she was satisfied. She was no longer so dreadfully angry. That is the end of part 1. We will pick up right here on page 40 of the PDF, second paragraph in part 2. Take care.